So please join me in welcoming Inez Storer, who will tell us all about
Andrew Romanoff's amazing work.
Good morning. My name is Inez Storer, and I am married to Andrew Romanoff, whose show you are viewing. And I'll give a few words anecdotally about the show and about what he was about, and we'll go and move from there. So to start with, which is the theme piece for his show, is Morning in Firenze, which is a anecdotal piece that when we were going to Italy frequently, because I was teaching there, he would go down and have a cup of coffee and he'd watch the motorbikes. And I always laughed because I thought that the piece with the white pajamas looked like Sam Francis, who actually lived out in Inverness. Andrew and I met here, and we ended up combining two families. He had two children, his wife had died, I had four, I was divorced, and so it was the Brady Bunch. He soon saw that I was really committed to my art practice, and on one of the trips that we took nearby, we went to Mendocino, and he found this shrinky-dink, and he became absolutely enamored of the process. It was a store where one of my former students was working, and so he started getting, they were children's toys, and he started buying the shrink toys so he could get the plastic. At some point, the people who did this, fabricated, who lived in the Midwest, heard about him and said, "We're going to give you a lifetime supply of shrinky-dinks." So that's what he had, and he couldn't stop. Many summers, Andrew and I would go to Italy. I would be teaching workshops there, and the Deruta Ceramic Center invited us both to come and make ceramics. And these are two of the really large amount of stuff that we made because we'd be there for 2 weeks. And at first they just wouldn't speak to us because they do very tiny, minute things. And I said, "Andrew, we can give them candy every morning and then they'll be nice to us." That's just exactly what happened. Moving along, he worked both in assemblage, which is the middle piece, which is the conductor, and then the shrinky-dinks, which surround the center image. And he read the paper, he picked up on events, and then he took that kind of news and translated into his work. Flyover was more about what was going on with Russia. We went to Russia many, many times, and he did too. He had, Gallery Route 1 had a show there with Russian artists, and 1990 just after Glasnost, and it was a wild success. And we showed there after at different times. Now, moving towards the photography, he always took pictures. His father gave him a camera when he was young, and the Russian family all had cameras. They grew up with cameras, box cameras. So that's why there's so much footage from the turn of the century during the Revolution, because everybody had a camera. So this is from the Winter Palace, a banquet, and they were very interested in having Andrew there because his father was born there, and so they were extremely fascinated by meeting somebody who lived in America and wore Birkenstocks. So that's a handmade building that he took, not a nail in it. I don't know where it is exactly, but I think it's out in the country. Then he also was invited to do monotypes at Smith Anderson Editions in Palo Alto, and so this is represents one of them, and he always said that was the queen in the nude fishing with her equerry, Queen Elizabeth, who was the cousin. So the pieces that we're now moving towards, again, these are narrative works, and they come right out of his mind. He didn't have a filter, and by not having a filter, he could put anything he wanted down. He didn't have the sensibility that so many of us do. I do will work. On the right wall here, you're going to see a collaboration with Cindy Davis and Andrew, who did the sort of the exquisite corpse routine, where she did a piece, part of it, he did a piece, they passed it back and forth. And these are a selection of this work that she did with him for quite a number of years. So it's more recent work, so that's why they're there. It was to keep his mind in tune. I installed 3 of these panels of this character that he did before he stopped making art. And I have no idea whether this is a patriarchal figure. It's reminiscent of characters that he invented. He didn't talk about them, he just did them. And they were pretty much belonged to the same family, more or less. The one on the lower right, I sort of think is in a way autobiographical, because he's the small boy, and maybe it's his tutor who says, yes, you can learn this, or whatever, because he had tutors until he was about 11 or 12, and they sent him off to the British boarding school. So that's what these 3 pieces, where I combined the work on one panel, and he was very interested in cartooning. I don't think he ever read the cartoons. He wasn't somebody that followed comic strips, but he had his own sensibility. And in his family, they were all artists, and a lot of them did cartoon figures. I'm not kidding, that they all made art, and they did cartoon figures, illustrations. His father designed handbags in the shape of the Queen Mary, and so they were artists. And there was a large show of their work, including the generation before. His grandmother was quite a big illustrator of miniatures, mainly flowers that were exquisite. And so he came by it in a way, sort of through generations of their making art. So these are more on the cartoon scale, and sort of like a portion of the last works that he did. Over here is pretty much a variety of his small anecdotal shrinky-dinks, and it was really about current events. The title of the one in the top left is called She Wants a Raise. He was greatly interested in feminism and what strictures were placed on that. And then Lebed Grozny is a war piece, and when that short little war existed, and he made a piece on it. He usually followed what was going on politically. And let's see. Then, just to show that he had sculpture on his mind, this piece is what I would call a one-off. He did this a number of years ago, And I was so taken by the title because it's almost could be done now, The World After Destruction. And he was very aware of climate change and what it did, because he was a mushroom hunter, and mushrooms are extremely sensitive to the climate changes. He was very well known as a mushroom hunter, and people would bring their mushrooms and say, "Are these poisonous?" And he said, "I wouldn't eat them," meaning, and they weren't quite sure what that answer was, but he was he jealously protected his particular places where he did mushroom hunting. Now, on your right are more, for the most part, recent works, and but on the top middle, the mask, he did a whole series of masks, and because we had visited Picasso's museum in France, and he became fascinated by that. And they were made out of ceramic, but he did it in sheet ink and much, much smaller than Picasso did. That piece is the cat. That's a painting he did. He worked with acrylics, and that really sort of nailed him as an outsider artist, because everything is just, he had no filter. He would just do what he felt worked for him, and that's usually the genre of outsider artists. So that one, and then the one next to it is about Russian history, and Nevsky Prospect is the main street in St. Petersburg. And he took it and made it into a historical event out of Russian folklore as well as history. So I like to think of that as a signifier piece of his own Russian past. And then on the wall on the right is a selection of pieces that are somewhat taken from his autobiographic notations from his first book. So the one with the yellow in the middle is Christmas, and he and his cousins are getting presents from his grandma. And below it is My Father's Eyes, and he was an Orthodox Russian, and he had a very strong affinity for iconographic imagery. And because the art form in Russia is icons, and that's his form of an icon formation. He's a nice one to end with, I think. And in closing, it's a overview of the fact of how he grew up, his history, and he was also a rabid mushroom collector, and he would get very upset if he saw a car parked by where he collected mushrooms, and people would come to the house and they'd bring in the most, I mean, I wouldn't eat them anyway, and say, "Do you think these are safe?" And he would say, "I wouldn't eat them." I said, "That's not telling him that they could die." And he didn't say very much. So people who are mushroom hunters would probably understand that. They don't want to give away where they hunt mushrooms. And then he was a gymnast. And he was head of what is called the Russian Sokol in San Francisco. And he was really strong, and he maintained his strength to this day. He's now 97, soon to be 98. And by golly, he's in good health, and which is amazing, because he's lived a hard life. Anyway, that is the conclusion of a little sort of overview of Andrew and his life.